Hi there. Welcome to another in our series of AAPI Heritage Month interviews. My name is Paolo Debuque. I am the Chancel Choir Director and Music Coordinator here at Good Sam. My pronouns are he and him. And I'm delighted to be joined today by Kenny Vigne.
I do go by Kenny, but I like the way that Kenneth looks on paper.
The first time we corresponded, you said that, and I said, like, it reminds me of how Billy Joel talks about his name. He's like, I'm 65. I feel like a William more than a Billy. Kenny's a Chinese American organist, pianist, composer, a man of many musical talents, a St. Olaf grad who went on to study organ at the University of Oklahoma, and he currently serves as the Associate Director of Music at Westminster Presbyterian Church in downtown. Kenny has graciously offered to not only give us some context about his identity and his experiences as we acknowledge AAPI Heritage Month, but also to lend us some music to acknowledge it with. So we will be touching on that, and the choir will be singing his music on Sunday, May 19th. So you can look forward to that. Kenny, could you just tell us a bit about yourself? Your childhood, growing up, your musical diet.
Absolutely. So I was born in Beijing, China, and my mom and my dad were separated at the time, and my dad was at the University of Oklahoma, and my mom and I were chilling in Beijing. My mom decided at that point that a child needs to know his dad, so she decided that we would get a visa and come here and visit and stay for like a year, just so that I would have experience with the whole family, even though they were separated at the time. While we were here, the Tiananmen Square massacre happened back in China, and my mom, being an economics professor in Beijing, decided that it was not safe to return, and we've been here ever since. So,
Wow.
Yeah.
And how old were you when you moved here?
I was just about 2 years old.
Okay.
So I don't have much recollection of any of this.
Mm-hmm. But Chinese is your first language then? Is that...
It could be generously said that Chinese was my first language, though I only conversationally spoke it at home, and unlike most Chinese parents in Minnesota, I was not forced to go to Chinese school.
Would you say you're fluent now?
No, I would say I'm probably conversational. I can very minimally read and write Chinese, but I can carry on a conversation with my mom.
Mm-hmm. So what was the presence of the Chinese language in and around your childhood?
It's kind of funny because I think with anybody who is bilingual or experiences either culture or languages in different ways, you sort of have a code shift. So as soon as I am in a room with my mom, no matter who else is in the room, I'd suddenly code switch to Chinese, and even if I'm speaking English, I'm translating from Chinese to English. And it's something that I guess just won't go away.
And so, musically, what was in your house growing up, in your ears?
It's actually a little bit of a miracle that I turned out to be a musician at all. I think my mom and dad really appreciated music, but we didn't listen to music. But I think my mom really, really, really wanted me to be a musician of some sort. So I don't think we sort of had the language or the culture of, this is what we do as musicians. We listen to Brahms every night, or we go to as many shows as we can. What I had growing up was a hilarious cassette tape of Beethoven pieces set to nature sounds, as well as Joshua Bell playing Tchaikov's violin concerto on a CD that I really loved. We had some Enya. We had some Japanese New Age music. So the music that I grew up with was really eclectic, but all of it has somehow influenced where I am now. And in terms of once I started playing piano, and I begged my mom to start playing piano because all my friends were playing piano, and piano was the coolest thing. We started with the Suzuki program, which is famous for not only being this strict program, but also famous for really focusing on Baroque music, so European Baroque music. And even though I didn't stay with Suzuki that long, when you sort of take piano lessons, you sort of have the musical language of Western European music, namely German music and maybe a little bit of French music in there.
Some Italian if you're feeling spicy.
If you're feeling spicy, yes.
This is really interesting. I'm in what you're talking about. I hear a bit of my experience. My parents felt very strongly that I should have music lessons and be musically engaged, but they were not really musicians themselves, especially not my mom. My mom, I don't think ever had instrument lessons or was engaged in any musical activities growing up, but felt very strongly that I and my sister should have that. Do you have a sense of where that came from? Why that was?
I think, like I mentioned earlier, she was just a very big music appreciator. I think she wanted music to be in the home, and I really appreciated how much she supported that and how much she pushed me to continue.
So how does excited to play piano transition to learning organ, transition to graduate degrees in organ?
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe you can tell me that this isn't typical, but in my experience, this is typical, where as a Chinese musician, you learn and you pour your life into your instrument until you're 18. But then when you go into college, it's time to get a big boy degree and learn science or get into medicine. And my mom really had dreams of me being an anesthesiologist and buying a big mansion in California with an orange grove.
Wow.
But I decided to go to St. Olaf College because I thought the music was super cool there. And when I went to St. Olaf, I started attending chapel just because I was like, what is this? I'd gone to church periodically when I was a kid, but never really with peers that were excited to go to church. And so when I had peers that were excited to go to church, I thought I would want that experience. And when I heard the giant pipe organ in Bow Chapel for the first time, I thought, I have to play this instrument. I can't believe that one person is making this much sound in this space. And I just felt like there was so much you could do with it. All of the things that I tried to pretend to do on the piano, like trying to pretend that this little melodic passage is the flutes, or we've got some horns in the lower part of the tenor melody in this piece. An organ can do it. It can literally imitate the flute or the French horn or the strings. And so I ended up dropping my chemistry major to the chagrin of my parents and going full into music, thinking this is what I was put on this green earth to do.
Can definitely relate with parental chagrin. Yeah. I think it took quite a few years for that to wear off. What was I going to say? So another thing that I'm interested in, I was not raised with religion. And it was only through music that I, first as a section leader in a choir and then as the choral director, et cetera, only through that avenue have I become acquainted with and sympathetic to, et cetera, religion and spirituality. Is there parallel analog to that in your experience?
Sort of. I have a weird story related to that, which is when I got really excited to be an organist, and I'd known a little bit about religion. Some of my friends' families were religious. I'd gone to both Chinese and American church services. I went to the head of the organ department and said, I want to play the organ. How do I get into this program? And he told me wisely, but perhaps a little problematically, if you really want to be an organist, Kenny, you need to at least be able to pretend to be a Christian. So I will accept you into my organ studio if you go to confirmation class.
That is very interesting.
Right? And so I went to confirmation class, and I think I'd always been agnostic, questioning, wondering, finding an avenue to be able to have more understanding into it. And the pastor at St. Olaf at the time was just amazing. And I won't say that he answered a lot of questions, but he made me feel empowered to ask. And that was sort of my avenue in. And so I think my love of organ and my love of Jesus and being a church geek all sort of grew together.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a sense with hindsight of what your organ professor meant by that?
I think one of the things that I told him was, I think if I drop my chemistry degree and I take on an organ performance degree, my mom's going to be really angry, and she's going to think that I'm going to be starving on the street within 2 years of graduating. Mm-hmm. And the organ professor there was like, you're going to work at a church, and so you need to be able to at least be able to pretend that you're Christian, but you'll never starve. There will always be church jobs out there, and you will always be able to get one.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of be able to talk the talk.
Yeah.
At the very least.
I don't know if he was necessarily proselytizing, but he at least presented it to me in a very practical way.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel like that experience of learning the organ and learning Christianity in parallel, did they feed each other in it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was really interesting because I got to enter hymnody as somebody who was supposed to be an expert at it, but where all hymns were new to me.
Right.
So whenever everybody would sing, I, the Lord, is sea and sky, here I am, Lord, where other organists have played this for decades, and they would just groan. I'd be like, this is the coolest song.
Yeah, right. I feel like I'm still discovering hymns. Mm-hmm. Christian has just an encyclopedic knowledge of hymns. He has worked in every denomination, worked with every hymnal, and so I'm just constantly finding new hymns.
Being a hospice music therapist, kind of that too. I have to learn everyone's music.
Right.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, this dig into hymnody is actually the beginning of how I started to reconnect with my Chinese music roots as well, because up until this point, I'd basically heard Chinese music as Chinese pop songs in a Chinese buffet.
Right. Canto pop.
Yep, yeah. Exactly. And my first experience with these Chinese hymns was being like, whoa, it's super cool that we have Chinese hymns in this newfangled ELW hymnal that we have here. And I really love how multicultural we're getting. And then as soon as we'd start to sing them, I kept getting told the same thing. Wow, these Chinese hymns are really hard to sing. Or we don't want to do them because they're just tough to sing for people. And I'm not sure if that was coding for we don't like this, or if it was actual difficulty, but I think throughout that started getting me to start to question why. Mm-hmm. Why is this difficult? And why is this difficult in a way that you don't want to learn it like you might want to learn the Messiah, and instead want to just set it off to the side for some Chinese Appreciation Day or something like that.
Yeah, difficulty is a code word in a lot of situations. I hope that we're moving past it, but yeah. And when did that happen for you? When did you start discovering these hymns?
So I started discovering them about my junior year in college, and that was also the time that I started taking world music classes and started to really broaden my horizons beyond the Western European music scene. And I am really happy that I decided to go through it with an open mind, because going to St. Olaf, I'm going to maybe make some people angry, but we were pretty stuck about a lot of things. And so we had an opinion and a judgment on things, but the more I dug into world music, for instance, getting to hear Indonesian gamelan at Carleton for the first time, or I started to do some projects on some traditional Chinese instruments, many of which I hadn't actually heard before then, such as the pipa or the guzheng. I just started getting more and more into it and realizing that 1-4-5-1 4-part choral harmony isn't the end all and be all of music. There's so much more, many more layers in there that you can dig into with Indian ragas or sort of the Chinese sensibility of what you can do with just these 5 notes, but colored in different ways.
The hymn that you've brought to us, the English translation of it is Our Parting Blessed by Christian Bonds, and we've been working on it, and it is so beautiful. We'll be singing it at May 19th.
Okay.
But can you tell us about a little context about that hymn?
Absolutely. I get down internet rabbit holes at like 1 a.m. all the time, and this was one of them. I ended up reading this, oh gosh, I'm going to forget his name. His wife's name is Mildred Wyant, and I think his name was Frank Wyant. But he was a missionary to China, and he is sort of considered the father of Chinese hymnody, because he decided to start bringing not only Western hymn music to China as he was doing his missionary work, but he actually really immersed himself in Chinese music and thought there's room for these Christian sensibilities and words that in these Chinese folk songs, and like this Christianity isn't just something that I'm bringing from Europe here. This is here already, and I'm going to cultivate that here. So
that's a lot of humility for a for a European guy. Yeah.
So I ended up reading his dissertation at 1 a.m. one day, and on how you can use Chinese folk song as sort of a foundation for hymnody. And this was one of his original pieces, and Mildred Wyant is the person who wrote the hymn text. His wife, yes. So Yangguan Sandie is a famous Chinese poem and folk tune, and it is really, really lovely, and it is bittersweet. Yangguan Sandie means 3 times or 3 refrains at Yangguan. And to give a little bit of history on this folk tune and this poem, it was written by a poem Wang Wei, who was writing, I think, somewhere between 701 and 761 AD, so real old. And this poem has, transcended millennia. First got set to music somewhere around 1463 or something like that. And the tune and the words have sort of, they've been added to, they've been changed, but they've really existed in some form that's very close to their original for the past 6 or 7 centuries. Yangguan, at the time that Wang Wei was writing, was the westernmost outpost of China. It basically is the last city that you get to before you go on the Silk Road to go trade your goods and make your fortunes. And the original text of it, here, I can sing you the original text and I can translate it for you. It goes, 渭城朝雨浥轻尘，客舍青青柳色新。劝君更尽一杯酒，西出阳关无故人。And what this describes is, it describes the dust of the morning mixing in with morning light and a slight drizzle coming down. It's a conversation between 2 friends, and one friend is begging his other friend, just stay for one more drink with me. Because once you go west out of Yangguan, you're going to have no friends anymore. You're going to have no family. your trip, even though you're making your fortune, could take years. You might never come back. And so please stay with me just for one more drink. And then it happens 2 more times because it's 3 refrains.
3 refrains.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very insistent. If you've ever had a meal with a Chinese person, it just keeps on going. But the translation that Mildred Wyant did with Our Partings Blessed with Christian Bonds, I thought was just really beautiful, in that it really kept a lot of those same sensibilities of we don't know when we're going to see each other again. It sort of got parallels with the Irish blessing, like may the wind be always at your back. But I think the Our Partings Blessed at Christian Bonds says we don't know when we're going to see each other again, but our meeting and our relationship and what we have here is really, really blessed. And so I really like that it didn't just, take a Chinese folk song out of context. It really contextualized both themes and mixed them together.
Right.
That I really liked.
Right. That's really beautiful. It strikes me how spiritualities tend to rhyme, They're just these kind of baseline human wants and needs and curiosities that are inevitably reflected in every spirituality. And I think it's so beautiful that this very vivid scene that you've evoked of the eve of a years-long embarkation, and I think that'll be really, really beautiful context to us as we sing it basically as a benediction on May 19th, and more than that, a benediction and farewell to our beloved pastor.
Right.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm so glad that there's that additional context here for you as well.
Yeah. Great. So I want to shift gears a little bit, because we've talked in previous conversations about your role at Westminster, and specifically the work that you've been doing to honor and uplift the Westminster's history with the Chinese community in town. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that I'll go all the way back to college for just a split second and say that when I graduated from college, I knew that I wanted to work at a small church where everything felt like family. This is ironic because we now know that I work at a giant church. But I sort of accepted at that time that I would probably be introducing a lot of music to the congregations that I was in. I was expecting that the cultural heritage of these congregations would mostly be Western European, and they would mostly expect me to come in playing Bach and Beethoven and Mendelssohn and Brahms. Right. And so there were a lot of things that were unexpected about Westminster, and the first thing that happened was I noticed that there was this Chinese pastor on there. And for the very first time, there was this other AAPI person that was not only a colleague of mine, but in some position of power at this church. And somehow all of the things that I didn't think I needed, that I could leave at home with my Chinese heritage, or maybe I would hope that I could strategize bringing in Chinese hymns or Chinese music, but I was ready to leave those at home, all came flooding in and made me think I can't do that anymore, because I see what is possible. I see that there is a space that I can exist in as an AAPI person. And I had some conversations with this pastor, Dr. David Shin. He's a wonderful pastor.
I've met him, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And he introduced me to some of Westminster's history with the Chinese American population community here. When the first Chinese person came to Minnesota, I think it was the 1880s. This was shortly before the Chinese Exclusion Act happened. they found a home in Westminster Presbyterian Church, and Westminster Presbyterian Church welcomed them with open arms, and eventually not only had one of the big Chinese American teaching schools here, but also had one of the first actual Chinese services. So it became a pillar of the Chinese community here, and throughout the next few decades, especially after the Chinese Exclusion Act hit, Westminster fought for the rights of the Chinese community, and more people ended up flocking to them. So, like, every famous Chinese person that I know, including like actor James Hong, has ties back to Westminster Presbyterian Church. And so while the Chinese American population has now sort of spread out throughout the state, and we don't have as many Chinese people there anymore, I still wanted to make sure that that really significant, I guess I would call it an epic, in Westminster's history isn't just a footnote, or isn't just, oh, that's something cool that we did back then. I want to keep that alive. I want to make sure that generations of Westminster people can feel really proud that Westminster really stood up and backed the Chinese community when they needed it most.
And what forms has your work in this area taken?
Yeah, so not only do I make sure that we do go through all of the Chinese hymns in the hymnal, I mean, that's the first and foremost, right? Just to get that language and that sound within the ears of the community. We've had some Sundays where we've been able to track down some of the original congregation, or at least relatives of the original Chinese congregation, to come and have talks and be a part of the service. As much as we can, we try to, let's put it this way, I think one of my main goals at Westminster is that we do have quite a diverse community. And I want every person, whether they are AAPI, whether they are Chinese, or whether they, regardless of what culture they feel most at home with, I want them to be able to walk into the space and not only feel welcomed with words, but I want them to be able to hear their music. I want them to be able to smell the smells that make them feel like home. And so in everything that we do, we try to not only think what random cultures can we pull from, but what is the cultural makeup of our community, and how can we make sure that all of our community feels welcome and at home there.
Yeah, I love that. It's something that I've been thinking about personally a lot, is what I've taken to calling it radical inclusivity. This idea that the spaces that I hold, that I have, dominion is the wrong word. What's the spaces that I have some or responsibility over, purview, dominion, in my iron fist. The idea that being able to flip the script of, if you enter this space and you feel uncomfortable, unheard, any number of those things, that's my fault. Especially in classical music, right. It's very easy. I cannot count the number of times that I've been connected to or in contact with a choir who says something to the effect of like, no experience necessary, you just need to love to sing and you can learn the rest and whatever. And then somebody who is not steeped in Western classical music walks in and is just completely shut out by any number of unspoken, unwritten things.
Totally.
Who's going to talk at what time? What music are we singing? How do I read this music? Is anyone going to, put out an entrance ramp for me? And I love that idea of what you said of flipping the script, of not, your responsibility in coming to this space is to learn us. Our responsibility in holding this space is to learn you. Yeah. So what is your hope for specifically or do you have any specific hopes about Westminster and the Chinese community, or a relationship with its history?
I think I'll answer this by saying that I think one of the biggest struggles I have as an AAPI person is feeling like I am heard and I am listened to, not only as just a member of society, but that I can bring all parts of myself into the conversation. And I think we are, as an AAPI community, one piece of a much larger puzzle. But at the same time, if we are not heard, how many other people are being silenced?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When I think about what you just said, I think about the relationship between that feeling and the whole model minority
exactly
dynamic. That we're very, we're children of high achievers who have had high achievement instilled in us and are good at code switching.
Yeah.
In order to.
One of the things that comes to mind whenever the words model minority gets said is, as a kid, even as a teenager, there were a lot of times that I would get introduced to a new friend group, and my friends, to sort of break the tension in the room, would tell their friends, "Oh, don't worry about it. He's basically white." And at the time, I was like, "Cool. I'm a chameleon. This is my superpower. I can fit in wherever." Right. And I'm only realizing much later, wow, that really, really built some problematic thoughts in my head about who I was and how I could belong into a space.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. A question has come up that I'm going to spring on you.
Uh-huh.
Do you consider yourself Chinese American, some other label, or multiple of them, and then further, do you see a difference between if you called yourself Chinese and if you called yourself Chinese American?
So that's a really interesting question, and I think if you would ask 10 Chinese people this, you'd get 10 different answers. But my relationship with my culture is complicated because I didn't really grow up in my culture. And I think there was some sense of the immigrant story of survival that has the narrative, if you want to succeed and you want to go through life without being persecuted, you have to be as white adjacent as possible. And so my mom always instilled in me the sensibility of have mostly white friends. Try to do all the things that the white people do because that's the way that you're going to find the connections to be able to succeed. And I think in some ways that has been really limiting in my ability to connect with my Chinese heritage. And really, since I've been out of China for 36 years, the China that I know in my brain is not the China that exists in the world right now. I would go there and I not only would feel out of place, but it would feel weird because I would have this sense that I would be expected to feel like I belong there, and not. So I don't know that. The short answer to your question is I consider myself Chinese. Nothing else beyond that. But I don't know what that means. Because it's not really a loyalty to the China that I know in the world right now. And maybe I am Chinese American, but there is something that is very specifically Chinese American that has developed here, of people of third or fourth generations in this country feel and have like a kinship to that I don't feel like I have either because I came into it so much later or wasn't born in this country, etc.
It's a question that has been, I feel like I personally have been like circling around it and only recently was able to articulate it. But this idea of this duality and honestly friction between these ideas of Asian Americanness being a discrete identity, you know, and giving and in my history, giving myself permission to not be Filipino, not be Chinese. I just am not. My parents are, but neither am I, you know, a hot-blooded WASP American, you know. And that third in-between thing, if I can live in that and just be proud of that and just be authentically that, then I can start to like understand things from a more honest perspective. And I think that's what's animated this work at Good Sam, the 1,000 Tongues concert series. All that stuff is identifying that there is something Asian American. And the other side of the duality that I forgot to mention is that there also isn't anything, such a thing as Asian American.
Right.
You know, like you're beyond saying you're Chinese American. How many Chinese Americans are there? You know, you know, Hmong Americans have a much different suite of experiences than, you know, my parents who came here for grad school and quickly got, you know, white collar jobs.
Right.
And so this kind of duality that's of Asian American is its own thing, and also not a thing at all. And now I'm preaching. Sorry. but the idea that if we just allow ourselves to be who we are and bear the labels that are handed to us honestly, then these two things start to what's the word? There's less friction. Yeah. And that's one of the things that's been so interesting is, you know, I've talked with artists with very different experiences of their own identity, you know, and being able to hear what it means to them as just people is really cool.
Yeah, the stories are where it's at.
The stories are where it's at. I want to talk before we leave off about your piece that you've written for us and that we'll be singing on May 19.
Yeah.
It's called I Bring the Hope. Tell us where it came from and some of the meaning of it to you.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I suggested the piece, and it's honestly probably the most banal, boring melody I've ever written. It only is like in an interval of a sixth, and it repeats, and it's in 4-bar phrases. And I'm a person who likes their crunchy chords. I like melodies that sort of are interminable or keep on getting interrupted into more complex harmonies.
You said you're an organist?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, there you go. But I was going for something completely different when writing I Bring the Hope. And a lot of the themes that we talked about actually worked themselves into this piece. I originally wrote it when my good friend Amanda Weber, who is not only the director of music and the arts at Westminster, but also the director of Voices of Hope, put out a commission for, can somebody write out a piece for Voices of Hope? And although this piece wasn't written specifically for Voices of Hope, I never entered that contest, it inspired me to write something that's really simple and really ask the question, who are you?
And just for Voices of Hope is a prison choir.
Correct.
Right? Primarily women's correctional facilities.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yep. I think there's a Stillwater and a Shakopee. So when I was writing this piece, I wanted to pare down all of the things that I sort of put into music and get as close to just the words as possible. And I wrote the words to the piece, and I wrote them to be just very, very simple. I didn't try to do any sort of poetic allusions or references or anything like that. I just wanted just to be very simple and spoken. Some of the words don't fit the melody quite right, and that's totally fine, because my good friend Joe Davis, who's a spoken word artist around town that this congregation may know, he wrote this poem called "Who Is Your Everyone?" Because he, in going to churches, kept on hearing, well, we welcome everybody here. And he wanted to ask the question, well, who is your everyone? Right. Who does your everyone include? Who does your everyone exclude? And I think he also worked his way into an influence to I Bring the Hope, because I think I see the I Bring the Hope as not really a sequel, but something inspired by that. Instead of asking the church as a whole body, who is your everyone? I want to ask each individual in the church, well, who are you? And what do you bring? And not only, it's not like what gifts do you bring to this church, but who do you inhabit? Who do you embody while you're sitting in this pew, while you're singing a hymn? And I think it's born out of, I mentioned earlier, me feeling like there are things that I can probably leave home about my culture. But when going to a church, especially one that is expecting more of a Western European tradition, but at the same time, all these things inhabit my body. And when I come to church, and when I come to that communion table that is set out for everybody, these are all the things that are a part of me. And so I Bring the Hope. I think the real hope of that piece is, these are my experiences as an immigrant, where I bring a multitude of things within my body, my experiences, to church. And whether they are things that I've told other people, or things that people know about me, they are all brought here and laid out before God, in front of this communion table. And I want I kept it simple. I kept the melody really accessible, because I wanted to bring out a certain universality of that experience. And I want everybody to know that I have my own experiences as an immigrant, but in a way, you, no matter who you are, share these experiences with me, and that you can know me through your experiences as well. And so the piece begins simply. It's all in unison. There's a lot of repeated notes. It's hard to sing. Sorry, everybody. But it grows not in a way that it gets more complex, but hopefully in a way that feels more full, as people, I guess, through introspection, can realize I am so much more than people see me at church. And that all of these things are shared by all of us around this table that we all share together.
It's so beautiful, and that it's aligning a lot with my experience with the piece thus far. That that by the end, it doesn't feel, like you said, it doesn't feel like we've gotten like grander, or like that the spirit has changed. It feels more like we've just kind of come together. We've just kind of gathered, and the effect is grander in that there's more stuff happening. But it's Well, I'm so excited. I'm really so excited for you to share that with our choir on Wednesday. I think it's gonna really crystallize some things and give us a really great perspective for performing it.
I'm so glad.
Yeah. Well, Kenny, thank you so much for being here and for sharing yourself and your music with us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. This is my pleasure.